You'll regret not helping family when you needed us most, my sister declared as I deleted her number. 3 months later, she showed up at my wedding uninvited. The ivory envelope of my own engagement party invitation sat heavy in my hands, crisp edges cutting into my fingertips as I turned it over and over. Another name waited to be written: Rebecca, my sister. The pen hovered, trembling slightly, ink suspended above paper like a storm about to break. Could I invite her? Should I? My chest tightened. Memories crashed through me like waves against a crumbling shoreline: her voice, her lies, the calculated destruction she'd nearly brought to everything I'd built. I set the pen down, breathed. At 29, I finally had everything I once thought impossible: career success, a loving partner, freedom from the shadow of family expectations. Meanwhile, Rebecca's life was collapsing in spectacular fashion: fired from her prestigious job, marriage disintegrating, financial ruin looming on her horizon like an approaching storm. But the journey from family scapegoat to where I am now wasn't without its casualties, my sister's reputation being one of them. And despite everything, some twisted, broken part of me wondered if I should feel guilty about that. I don't. Growing up as Amy meant existing in the negative space around Rebecca. She was 6 years older, endlessly accomplished, and the unchallenged center of my parents' universe. I learned early that achievement was measured on a sliding scale. What would earn Rebecca moderate praise required perfection from me to merit acknowledgement. My straight A report card collected dust while Rebecca's B- in economics earned a celebratory dinner. Her mediocre piano recitals warranted enthusiastic applause. My first-place art competitions received distracted nods and mumbled "that's nice, honey" responses. I remember one Christmas when I was 14 watching Rebecca unwrap a MacBook Pro while I received practical clothes and school supplies. My father noticed my expression and pulled me aside. "Rebecca needs it for her business classes," he explained, his tone gentle but dismissive. "Art is a lovely hobby, Amy, but it won't put food on the table." A hobby? That's all my passion ever was to them, a childish phase I would eventually outgrow in favor of something practical, something respectable, something like Rebecca's business career. By 17, I'd learned to stop sharing my accomplishments with my family. Each success became a private victory, each recognition a secret I kept for myself. I stopped showing them my artwork, my design projects, the scholarship offers. What was the point? The disappointment of their indifference hurt more than not telling them at all. The final breaking point came at my college graduation. I'd earned top honors in graphic design, secured an internship at a competitive agency, and given a speech as class representative. My parents attended, but they spent the entire dinner afterward discussing Rebecca's recent promotion at her financial firm. "Vice president at 32, my father boasted to the waiter who hadn't asked and clearly didn't care. The youngest in company history." I sat there, cap and gown still on, achievement honors cord around my neck, completely invisible. My mother touched my hand once, smiled absently, then turned back to my father's monologue about Rebecca's meteoric rise. That night, I decided to cut the emotional tether I'd been desperately clinging to. I would build a life where my worth wasn't determined by comparison to my sister, where my success wasn't measured against hers like competing products on a shelf. I moved to Chicago the following week. I didn't tell them I was leaving until the day before. My mother cried, not understanding why I was running away. My father looked confused, then disappointed. "You're being dramatic," he said, shaking his head, "just like when you were little." I didn't argue, there was no point, I just left. 3 years of grinding work followed, 80-hour weeks at a design agency, side gigs, networking events where I smiled through exhaustion, cold emails, rejected pitches, ramen noodles and roommates, and relentless self-doubt. But slowly, painfully, success began to materialize. My portfolio grew, clients started requesting me specifically. My digital illustrations caught attention, then accolades, then industry awards. I was breathing easier, standing taller when I met Jacob. We collided at an industry conference, literally. I spilled coffee on his perfectly pressed shirt, mortified until I saw him smiling instead of scowling. He had kind eyes, laugh lines, a voice that felt like warm honey. I've been trying to figure out how to introduce myself to you all morning, he confessed as I frantically dabbed at his ruined shirt. Though I'll admit this wasn't quite the icebreaker I had in mind. I learned later that Jacob already knew who I was. He'd admired my design work for months. But at that moment, he was just a kind stranger with coffee-stained business casual and a disarming smile. What began as apologetic coffee turned into dinner, which evolved into the most natural relationship I'd ever experienced. Jacob built his business from nothing, a digital marketing agency that had become the industry's rising star. He understood ambition, drive, the hunger to prove yourself, but he also understood balance, joy, the importance of creating space for life alongside work. With Jacob, I felt seen, not as someone's sister or daughter or disappointment, just as Amy. 6 months into our relationship, he accompanied me to Thanksgiving at my parents' house. It was my first visit home in over 2 years. I'd shared enough success stories that even my parents had begun to acknowledge my career had surpassed hobby status. And I needed them to meet the man who had become my partner in every sense of the word. I should have anticipated Rebecca's reaction. The moment she saw Jacob, something shifted in her expression. A calculation, a narrowing of eyes, an assessment of what he represented: success, validation, happiness, all things she'd long considered her exclusive domain. At dinner, she was surgical. Questions about his business that probed for weaknesses. Comments about how sudden our relationship seemed. Subtle implications that my success was primarily due to his connections. Through it all, she maintained plausible deniability, her words technically appropriate while their intent formed razor blades. "It must be so convenient," she said, wine glass poised at her lips, "finding someone in the industry who can open doors for you." My parents exchanged glances but said nothing. They never contradicted Rebecca. "Actually," Jacob replied smoothly, "Amy's been opening doors for me. Her design work with Vertex last quarter helped us land 3 new clients." Rebecca's smile tightened. I saw something flash in her eyes, something cold and determined that sent ice water down my spine. That night, in my childhood bedroom, Jacob held me as I tried to explain the family dynamics he'd witnessed. "She's always been like this," I whispered. "I just never had anything she wanted before." I didn't realize then just how accurate and dangerous that assessment would prove to be. The sabotage began so subtly I almost missed it. First came the questions, innocent-sounding, concern-wrapped barbs delivered over family dinners or casual phone calls. "I hope Jacob's business is stable enough for the long term. So many startups fail these days. I noticed your designs have changed since you started dating him. I liked your old style better. It felt more authentic." Little seeds of doubt planted with surgical precision, designed to take root in the dark corners of my mind. Then came the helpful advice. Rebecca suddenly developed an interest in my career, something she'd never bothered with before. She'd forward articles about designers who'd compromised their integrity for commercial success. She'd reminisce about my true potential before Jacob, implying I was somehow diminished by his presence in my life. My parents, hearing only her voice most frequently, began echoing her concerns. "Are you sure about this relationship?" my mother asked during one call. "Rebecca mentioned he seems controlling about your work." When I confronted Rebecca, her performance was masterful, eyes widening with hurt, voice catching with perfect emotion. "I'm just looking out for you," she insisted, a single tear balancing perfectly on her lower lash. "After everything you've been through, don't you think you might be rushing into this relationship? I'm concerned, that's all." The gaslighting was so effective I actually apologized to her. The campaign escalated when she realized her subtle approach wasn't working. A mutual friend called, troubled, saying Rebecca had pulled her aside at a party to share worries about Jacob's business practices. A client withdrew from a contract after receiving concerning information about my work. Former classmates reached out, repeating almost verbatim questions Rebecca had planted about whether my relationship was healthy. By the 6-month mark, anonymous social media accounts appeared, hinting at professional misconduct by both Jacob and me. Business competitors somehow knew details of proposals that only family members had heard about. A particularly lucrative partnership dissolved overnight after the potential investor received troubling information from a reliable source. My parents remained oblivious or perhaps willfully blind. "Rebecca's just protective," my mother insisted during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. "She's always looking out for you." The real damage emerged when Jacob nearly lost a $2.7 million contract, the largest of his career, after someone sent his potential clients a dossier of fabricated evidence suggesting financial impropriety. The documents came from an anonymous source, but the writing style, the specific knowledge of Jacob's presentation details I'd mentioned only to my family, made the source painfully obvious. I discovered later that she'd created an entire digital portfolio of manipulated evidence against us. Screenshots edited to show conversations that never happened. Financial documents altered to suggest impropriety. Even fake text messages between Jacob and an invented mistress. The night we uncovered the full extent of her machinations, I sat on the bathroom floor, shaking uncontrollably, while Jacob made calls to salvage what remained of a major client relationship. My chest felt hollow, my lungs struggling to draw breath. The sister I'd grown up with, the person who should have protected me, had methodically worked to destroy everything I loved. What kind of emptiness lived inside her that my happiness caused her such pain? The breaking point came suddenly, brutally. We were meeting with investors, the biggest meeting of our careers, the culmination of a joint project between our two businesses. Minutes before our presentation, Rebecca appeared in the conference room doorway, clutching a manila folder. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she announced to the room of startled executives, "but there's something you need to know before you invest with my sister and her boyfriend." Time suspended. My vision tunneled. The room, all those watchful eyes, disappeared until there was only Rebecca, her folder, and the cruel triumph in her expression. Jacob moved before I could, blocking her path with quiet authority. "This isn't the place," he said, voice low and controlled. "They deserve to know who they're really dealing with," she insisted, trying to step around him. What followed exists in my memory as disjointed fragments. Security being called, Rebecca's escalating voice, the investor's uncomfortable expressions, my complete humiliating silence, years of conditioning rendering me mute in the moment I most needed to defend myself. Afterward, Jacob held me as I finally shattered, sobbing so hard I couldn't speak. When the storm passed, something new had taken root inside me, a hardness, a clarity. "Enough," I said, voice hoarse but steady, "this ends now." We hired an attorney the next day. A cease and desist letter was drafted detailing every instance of defamation, every act of sabotage, every piece of evidence we'd accumulated. Potential charges were outlined in clinical language: defamation, tortious interference with business relationships, harassment. The letter felt substantial in my hands before we sent it, the weight of consequences finally shifting from my shoulders to hers. We delivered it to her office personally. I wanted to see her face when she realized I was finally standing up to her. Her expression, shock giving way to fear, giving way to rage, burned itself into my memory, a photograph I'll never lose. "You wouldn't," she whispered, face pale. "I already have," I replied, my voice belonging to someone stronger than I'd ever been allowed to be in her presence. "This is your only warning." The aftermath was nuclear. Rebecca's carefully cultivated professional reputation couldn't withstand scrutiny once people started looking closely. Colleagues came forward with stories of manipulated information, stolen credit, strategic undermining that mirrored what she'd done to me. She was placed on administrative leave while her firm investigated. 2 weeks later, she was fired. Her husband discovered the obsessive documentation of her campaign against me, folders upon folders of manipulated evidence, fake accounts, detailed plans for destroying my relationships and business connections. The divorce filing cited psychological concerns and irreconcilable differences. My parents finally saw the truth when Jacob and I presented them with irrefutable evidence of what their golden daughter had done. My father aged 10 years in that single afternoon. My mother wept, apologizing over and over for not believing me, for not protecting me, for not seeing what should have been obvious. Their apologies came 2 decades too late to heal the wounds of my childhood, but they were something, a beginning maybe. As Rebecca's life imploded, mine expanded. Jacob and I launched a successful joint venture. We bought our dream home. He proposed beneath cherry blossoms in spring, and I said yes without hesitation. The letter arrived 3 days after our engagement announcement appeared in the Chicago Tribune. My hands trembled as I recognized Rebecca's handwriting on the envelope, slanted and hurried, not the perfect penmanship she'd once prided herself on. I sat on our balcony, Chicago's skyline spread before me, and pulled out 5 pages of my sister's desperate words. The paper felt heavy, weighted with manipulation, each word a calculated step in a familiar dance. She began with contrition, theatrical, elaborate apologies that spanned the first page. By page 2, subtle blame began seeping through. "I was always Dad's project," she wrote, ink smeared where tears had fallen. "The perfect daughter they needed me to be. You don't know what that pressure was like, Amy. When you started succeeding, when you found Jacob, something inside me broke. I saw you happy, truly happy, in ways I'd never been allowed to be." My chest tightened, old reflexes stirring, the instinct to comfort her, to take responsibility for her feelings. "Maybe if they hadn't compared us so much," she continued. "Maybe if they hadn't made me feel that my only value was in my achievements. I know it's not an excuse, but I need you to understand that I was drowning. Your success felt like it was stealing my oxygen." By page 3, she detailed her collapse, bankruptcy looming, employment impossible with her tarnished reputation, divorce nearly finalized. She was selling furniture to make mortgage payments. Their parents couldn't help. Dad's retirement savings had taken a hit and they were barely managing themselves. "I don't expect forgiveness," she wrote, though every word screamed that she did. "I just need help, financial help, to keep my house and start over. I've hit rock bottom, Emmy," the childhood nickname she knew I hated. The 4th page held the knife twist, subtle references to our childhood. Selective memories rewritten to cast herself as my protector. "Remember when I helped you with that art project in 4th grade? I've always tried to look out for you in my way." I almost laughed. That help had been her taking over completely, telling me my work wasn't good enough. "I'm in therapy now," she claimed, "working through why I felt so threatened by your happiness. The therapist says it's because I never felt unconditionally loved the way you were." My stomach clenched, bile rising, the audacity of this revision of our childhood, painting herself as the unloved one. My heart pounded in my throat as her final paragraph burned into my consciousness. "I know I've made terrible mistakes, but we're still sisters. Blood, the only 2 people who understand what it was like growing up in that house. And sisters forgive each other, don't they? They help each other when no one else will. Please, Emmy, you're the only one I have left." Were we, though? Had we ever been sisters in any way that mattered? Sisters support each other, protect each other, celebrate each other's happiness. When had Rebecca ever done any of those things for me? I folded the letter carefully, precisely, and watched the sunset paint Chicago's buildings in amber and gold. Jacob found me there an hour later, still holding the folded paper. "What will you do?" he asked, kneeling beside my chair. The question hung between us, heavy with implications. Forgiveness, boundaries, the weight of shared history against the liberation of moving forward unburdened. "I'm sending money for 3 months of her mortgage," I said finally, "and the name of a good therapist, that's all." He nodded, understanding that this wasn't coldness, it was self-preservation, the opposite of the negligence I'd endured. I mailed the check the next day, along with a brief note: "This is not reconciliation. This is humane assistance to someone in need. Do not contact me again." The unfinished engagement party invitation with Rebecca's name on it went into the trash. Some broken things should not be repaired. Our wedding day arrived on a perfect autumn morning. Golden light spilled through stained glass as I walked down the aisle toward Jacob, my parents seated in the front row. They'd earned that place through months of genuine effort, hard conversations, and consistent respect for the boundaries I'd established. Rebecca's absence felt like freedom rather than loss. In my vows, I promised to cherish the family Jacob and I would build together, a family defined by support rather than competition, celebration rather than comparison, love without conditions or qualifications. The scars of being the disappointing daughter would always be part of me. They had formed calluses that became strength, wounds that became wisdom, a history that taught me exactly what I refused to accept in my future. As we danced beneath twinkling lights at our reception, Jacob's arms steady around me, I realized something profound. The greatest revenge against those who tried to diminish you isn't their downfall. It's your joy, your success, your unshakable certainty that you are exactly where you're meant to be. I didn't need Rebecca to suffer, I just needed her to leave me alone so I could finally completely thrive, and I have. Some days, I wonder if she's found her way back to stability, if she's done the work to understand what broken place inside her made my happiness so threatening. I wonder, but I don't ask, I don't check, I don't reach out. Instead, I focus on building something beautiful with the man who sees my value without comparison, on creating work that brings me pride and purpose, on nurturing friendships that celebrate rather than undermine. My parents call weekly now, they're trying, it's not perfect but it's honest, real, they've stopped mentioning Rebecca entirely, respecting that boundary like a sacred line. The disappointing daughter disappeared long ago, replaced by a woman standing firmly in her power, her worth no longer measured against anyone else's yardstick. The shadow of Rebecca's expectations can't reach me here, in this life I've built despite all their doubts. And if that hard-won peace makes me cruel for not rushing to rescue my sister from consequences of her own making, I can live with that.